The Hale family dining room had always felt like a stage to me, not because of the gleaming mahogany table or the crystal chandelier that cast everything in warm amber light, but because every Sunday brunch felt like a performance where I never quite knew my role. I sat between Daniel and Sophie, watching his mother, Eleanor, fuss over the perfectly arranged fruit platter while his father, Robert, poured mimosas with the precision of a man who took pride in small rituals. These moments should have felt peaceful. They would have been, if not for the sound of heels clicking against hardwood that made my shoulders tense without fail. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sorry I'm late. Victoria's voice carried that particular blend of breathless charm and subtle command that she'd perfected over the years. She swept into the room like she owned it, which, in many ways, she still did. This had been her house once, her family, her Sunday brunches. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, a gentle squeeze that said, "I'm here." I squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. "Victoria, darling, you look stunning as always," Eleanor beamed, rising to embrace her former daughter-in-law. The warmth in her voice was genuine, born from years of shared history that my 3 years with Daniel couldn't erase. Victoria did look stunning. She always did. Today was a silk blouse and cream that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, paired with designer jeans that fit like they were tailored specifically for her body. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves and her makeup was flawless, despite claiming she'd rushed over. "Thank you, Eleanor." Victoria's smile was radiant as she settled into the chair across from me, the one she'd occupied for 8 years of marriage. "I hope I didn't miss anything important." "Just the usual catching up," Robert said, passing her a mimosa. "Maya was telling us about the community center project." Victoria's eyes flicked to me with interest that felt more like calculation than curiosity. "Oh, a community center." "It's nothing major," I said, my voice steady. "Just some pro bono work for the East Side neighborhood. They needed someone to help redesign their youth space." "How civic-minded of you." Victoria's tone was honey-sweet, but there was something underneath it, like a blade wrapped in silk. "I'm sure they're grateful to have someone willing to work for free." Daniel shifted beside me. "Maya's been volunteering her architectural services there for months. The kids loved the new design." "Architect?" Victoria's eyebrows rose with what looked like surprise, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. "I had no idea. How wonderful that you can help out with smaller projects." The word "smaller" hung in the air like a challenge. Sophie, who'd been quietly scrolling on her phone, looked up sharply. Even at 17, she could sense the undercurrent in her mother's voice. "Maya designed the new children's wing at Mercy General, too. Remember, Dad? You showed me the article about it." Victoria's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of something in her eyes. Annoyance? Surprise? It was gone too quickly to read. "Well, isn't that nice?" she said, reaching for a croissant. "Though I suppose there's something to be said for different approaches to success. Some people go for the big, flashy projects, and others prefer the more humble path." There it was, the first cut delivered with surgical precision. Eleanor cleared her throat, clearly sensing the tension. "Maya, dear, would you pass the jam?" I reached for the small crystal bowl, my movements deliberate and calm. I could feel Victoria watching me, waiting for some reaction, some sign that her words had found their mark. But I'd learned, over 3 years of these small moments, that Victoria fed off reaction. Anger, hurt, defensiveness, they were all fuel for her fire. "Of course," I said simply, handing Eleanor the jam with a genuine smile. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying me with the intensity of a chess player contemplating her next move. "You know, Daniel," she said, her voice carrying that particular lightness that always preceded her sharpest observations. "I ran into the Ashfords at the club yesterday. They were asking about your new wife." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Were they?" "Mm-hmm."
She took a delicate sip of her mimosa. "I told them how different you two were, how you'd really gone for something completely opposite this time around. I mean, after 8 years with me, I suppose Maya must feel like quite the downgrade for them to process."
The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Robert suddenly became very interested in his newspaper. Sophie's phone clattered against the table as she set it down too hard. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, the urge to defend myself, to list my accomplishments, to remind Victoria that I had a master's degree from Columbia and had designed buildings she'd probably admired without knowing my name was on them. But I also felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine, felt Sophie's eyes on my face, felt the weight of everyone's attention. This was the moment Victoria was waiting for. The explosion, the tears, the dramatic defense of my worth. It would confirm everything she wanted to believe about me, that I was small, insecure, unworthy of the life she'd left behind. Instead, I smiled. Not the sharp, combative smile of someone ready for battle, but the serene expression of someone who knew exactly who she was regardless of anyone else's opinion. "Excuse me," I said softly, placing my napkin beside my plate. "I should check on the dessert I brought. It's probably ready to come out of the oven." I rose from my chair with unhurried grace, my movements calm and purposeful. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard Eleanor's voice tight with disapproval. "Victoria, that was unnecessary." "What?" Victoria's laugh was brittle now. "I was just being honest here. We're all family here, aren't we?" I paused in the doorway, not turning around. For a moment, I considered responding, considered turning back to deliver the perfect comeback that would put Victoria in her place. Instead, I continued into the kitchen, letting the door swing shut behind me. The apple tart I'd made that morning sat cooling on the counter, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and brown butter. I leaned against the granite countertop, taking a moment to center myself. This was Victoria's game, played by Victoria's rules. But I didn't have to play. Through the kitchen window, I could see Daniel's garden, the one I'd helped him replant last spring after Victoria had let it go to ruin during their divorce proceedings. The roses were blooming now, vibrant and strong despite the harsh winter they'd survived. Sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all. The drive home was quiet except for the soft hum of the radio and Sophie's occasional sighs from the back seat. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his jaw set in that particular way that meant he was fighting an internal battle between keeping peace and drawing blood. "I should have said something." He finally broke the silence as we pulled into our driveway. "I should have shut that down the moment she started." "It's fine," I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. Sophie unbuckled her seatbelt with more force than necessary. "Mom was being a total bitch," she announced, her teenage bluntness cutting through any pretense. "Sorry, Maya, but she was. That whole downgrade thing, that was just cruel." Daniel turned off the engine and rubbed his temples. "Sophie, language." "No, Dad, you always do this. You make excuses for her behavior because you don't want to deal with conflict. But Maya shouldn't have to sit there and take that crap just because you're afraid of making waves." Out of the mouths of babes. Sophie stalked toward the house, her dark hair, so much like Daniel's, whipping behind her as she yanked open the front door. "She's not wrong," I said quietly. Daniel looked at me, his brown eyes filled with guilt and frustration. "Maya, I'm sorry. I am. Victoria was out of line and I should have..." "You should have what? Started a fight at your parents' dining table? Made Sophie choose sides even more than she already has to?" "There was no good way to handle that moment, Daniel. Victoria made sure of that." We sat in the car for another moment, neither of us ready to face the house where Sophie was probably rage texting her friends about her impossible mother and her spineless father. "She's getting worse," Daniel said finally. "The comments, I mean, it used to be just little digs, but today?"
Today, she was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before someone pushed back. And you didn't take the bait. No, I didn't. I turned to face him fully. But Daniel, I'm tired. I'm tired of being treated like I'm some consolation prize you settled for. I'm tired of pretending it doesn't hurt when she implies I'm not good enough for the life you chose to share with me. And I'm really tired of watching you tie yourself in knots trying to keep everyone happy. Daniel reached for my hand. What do you want me to do?
It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for months. What did I want? For Victoria to disappear? That wasn't realistic, and it wouldn't be fair to Sophie. For Daniel to cut off all contact? That would only create more drama and put Sophie in an impossible position. I want to stop hiding, I said finally. I want to stop making myself smaller to make Victoria feel bigger. I want to go to events and hold your hand and talk about my work without worrying that someone's going to make it into a competition I never signed up for. Daniel squeezed my fingers. You shouldn't have to hide. You shouldn't have to apologize for being successful or kind or any of the things that made me fall in love with you. Then stop letting her set the tone for how we live our lives. We finally went inside to find Sophie sprawled on the living room couch, her laptop balanced on her knees. She looked up when we entered, her expression still stormy. She posted something on Instagram. Sophie said without preamble, "Mom did. Want to see it?" Daniel and I exchanged glances. "Do we?" he asked. Sophie turned her laptop screen toward us. Victoria's Instagram feed was, as always, a carefully curated collection of artful photos, her morning latte, her yoga class, her impeccably decorated living room. The newest post was a photo of her hands wrapped around a wine glass, the caption reading, "Sometimes the universe has a funny way of showing you exactly how much you've grown. Watching others settle for less makes you appreciate the standards you refuse to lower. Hashtag grateful, hashtag know your worth, hashtag never settle." Never settle. The implication was clear enough that even someone who'd never met us would understand the dig. Jesus, Daniel muttered. "There's more," Sophie said, scrolling down. "Look at the comments." A collection of fire emojis and "Yes, Queen" responses from Victoria's friends filled the comment section. But there were a few that made my stomach clench. "Some people really do trade down, don't they?" from someone named Jessica. "At least you know your worth, Fee," from another. I closed the laptop gently. "Enough." "Maya," Daniel started. "No, enough." I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked our small garden. I'm not going to let her narrative become my reality. She can post whatever she wants on social media, she can make all the implications she wants at family dinners, but I'm not going to keep living like I owe her an apology for existing. Sophie looked up from her phone. "What are you going to do?" The charity gala invitation was still sitting on my desk upstairs, the one I'd been planning to decline because Victoria would certainly be there. The Golden Gate Preservation Society's annual fundraiser, held at the Meridian Hotel Ballroom, the same ballroom where I'd been honored 3 years ago for my work on the historical renovation of the Pembridge building. "I'm going to stop avoiding her," I said. "Meaning?" Daniel asked. "Meaning I'm going to live my life, openly, and if Victoria wants to make that into a competition, she's welcome to try." I walked over to Sophie and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for defending me today. You didn't have to do that." She shrugged, but I caught the pleased flush in her cheeks. She was being unfair. Someone had to say it. As I headed upstairs to respond to the gala invitation, I heard Daniel say quietly to his daughter, "Your stepmother is tougher than she looks." "Good," Sophie replied. "Mom's been getting away with this crap for too long." In my study, I pulled out the elegant cream-colored invitation and read it again. The Golden Gate Preservation Society cordially invites you to our annual fundraising gala. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a line that made me smile. Honorary recognition will be given to this year's outstanding contributors to urban renewal and historical preservation. I'd received similar recognition before, but this year felt different. This year, I wouldn't be in the audience. I'd be on stage. I opened my laptop and typed a response accepting the invitation, then paused before adding a note requesting 2 tickets instead of just 1. Daniel should be there to see this part of my life too.
the part that existed long before Victoria's opinions and would continue long after she'd moved on to her next target. Then I opened my closet and pulled out a dress I'd worn exactly once to accept the American Institute of Architects' Young Professional Award 4 years ago. It was midnight blue silk, elegant without being flashy, the kind of dress that whispered confidence instead of shouting it. Victoria could keep her Instagram posts and her carefully curated image of superiority, but she was about to learn something important about the woman she kept calling a downgrade.
I was just getting started. The morning of the gala arrived crisp and clear, San Francisco fog rolling in from the bay like a gentle blessing. I stood in my study, sipping coffee and reviewing the notes for my brief acceptance speech. The Golden Gate Preservation Society had asked me to say a few words about the Pembridge Restoration Project, the one that had earned me recognition as one of the region's most promising young architects. Funny how Victoria's smaller projects comment kept echoing in my mind. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maya? Sophie's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in flannel pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep, looking younger than her 17 years. "Can I come in?" "Of course." I set down my coffee and turned to face her. "You're up early for a Saturday." She wandered over to my drafting table where architectural sketches and building plans were spread out like a paper city. Her fingers traced the edge of a blueprint, the new community center I'd been working on, the one that Victoria had so dismissively called civic-minded. "I never really looked at your work before," Sophie said quietly. "I mean, I knew you were an architect, but I didn't really understand." I joined her at the table. "What do you understand now?" "That these aren't just buildings." She picked up one of the renderings, the children's wing at Mercy General, the one she'd mentioned at brunch. "These are places where people's lives happen, where kids get better, where families find hope." Something warm unfurled in my chest. In 3 years of being Sophie's stepmother, we developed a comfortable relationship built on mutual respect and careful boundaries. But this felt different. This felt like seeing. "That's exactly what architecture should be," I said. "It's not about making monuments to ego. It's about creating spaces where life can flourish." Sophie moved to the shelf where I kept my awards, not prominently displayed, just tucked between books on sustainable design and urban planning. She picked up the crystal plaque from the AIA, reading the inscription. "Outstanding Achievement in Urban Renewal," she read aloud, "for Maya Chen Reyes, for her innovative approach to combining historical preservation with modern sustainability." She looked up at me. "Chen Reyes?" "My maiden name was Chen. I kept it hyphenated when I married your father. But Victoria always calls you Maya Reyes." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Another small erasure, another way of diminishing who I was before I became Daniel's second wife. "Victoria doesn't ask about my preferences." Sophie set the award down carefully. "She doesn't ask about a lot of things, does she?" Before I could answer, Daniel appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his running gear. His Saturday morning routine was sacred. 10 miles through Golden Gate Park, rain or shine. "Morning, ladies. Heavy architectural discussion before breakfast?" "I was just looking at Maya's work. Did you know she designed the new trauma center at UCSF too?" Daniel's smile was proud and a little sad. "I did know that. Your stepmother is brilliant, but she doesn't like to brag. Unlike some people we know," Sophie muttered. "Sophie," I said gently, though I appreciated her loyalty. "What? It's true. Mom posts pictures of her yoga class like she's saving the world, but Maya literally designs buildings that save lives, and she acts like it's no big deal." Daniel sat on the edge of my desk, careful not to disturb my sketches. Maya's work speaks for itself. It always has. I looked at both of them, my husband, who believed in me so completely, and his daughter, who was finally starting to see me as something more than just the woman who had replaced her mother. The weight of Victoria's constant diminishment felt lighter somehow. I should get ready. The gala starts at 7, and I want to look over my speech one more time. "Speech?" Sophie perked up. "You're giving a speech?" "Just a short one. They're recognizing some of this year's preservation work." Daniel grinned. "You didn't mention that part last night." "I didn't want to make a big deal of it." "Maya," Sophie said, her tone suddenly serious, "can I give you some advice?"
I raised an eyebrow from my teenage stepmother? Always.
Stop making yourself smaller. Stop downplaying your achievements because you're afraid of seeming like you're showing off. You're not Mom. You don't need to post everything on Instagram or announce every accomplishment to the world. But you also don't need to hide who you are. The wisdom in her words hit me like a gentle slap. When did I start diminishing myself? When had I begun to internalize Victoria's implications that my success was somehow less valid than hers? She's right, Daniel said quietly. I fell in love with your confidence, Maya. Your passion for your work, your pride in making a difference. Don't let Victoria take that away from you. I walked to my closet and pulled out the midnight blue dress, holding it up against myself in the mirror. It was beautiful, elegant, the kind of dress that commanded attention without demanding it. I haven't worn this since the AIA Awards, I said. Then it's perfect, Sophie said firmly. You should look like someone who deserves to be there. I do deserve to be there. Say it again, Daniel said, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. Like you mean it. I lifted my chin, seeing myself clearly for the first time in months. Not Victoria's competition, not the consolation prize, not the downgrade. Just Maya Chen Reyes, architect, who had earned her place in that ballroom through her own work, her own talent, her own dedication. I deserved to be there, and this time I meant it. Sophie grinned. There she is. As Daniel headed out for his run and Sophie went to make breakfast, I hung the dress on my door and opened my laptop one more time. The guest list for tonight's gala was public information, and sure enough, Victoria Hale was listed among the attendees. She'd probably bought her ticket the moment she heard I'd been invited to speak. Good. Let her come. Let her sit in the audience while I stood on that stage, recognized for work I'd done not to prove a point or compete with anyone, but because I believed in creating beauty and function and hope in the world. Tonight, Victoria would see exactly what kind of woman her ex-husband had chosen to love. Not a downgrade, not a consolation prize, but someone who had built her own life, her own career, her own reputation long before she'd ever heard the name Hale. I picked up my speech notes one more time, making a small revision. When I'd written, "Thank you for this honor," I crossed it out and wrote instead, "Thank you for recognizing work that matters." Because it did matter. I mattered, and tonight, in front of everyone who'd heard Victoria's subtle implications and not-so-subtle posts, they were going to see exactly who I was. I was done hiding. The Meridian Hotel ballroom glittered like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the cream silk walls, and the soft jazz quartet in the corner provided the perfect soundtrack for San Francisco's architectural elite to sip champagne and discuss urban planning over hors d'oeuvres. I stood near the bar with Daniel, watching the crowd and trying to calm the flutter in my stomach. In 20 minutes, I'd be called to the stage to accept recognition for the Pembridge restoration. In my purse, my speech notes were folded into a neat square, though I'd practiced it enough times that I could recite it from memory. You look stunning, Daniel said, his hand resting on the small of my back. And nervous. A little, I admitted. The midnight blue dress felt like armor tonight. Beautiful, protective, empowering. It's been a while since I've spoken publicly about my work. You'll be brilliant. You always are. A ripple of movement near the entrance caught my attention, and I felt my spine straightened instinctively. Victoria had arrived, and she hadn't come alone. She glided into the ballroom, flanked by two perfectly dressed women I recognized from her Instagram, Jessica and Amanda, her closest allies in the war of passive-aggressive social commentary. Victoria wore a red dress that hugged every curve, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, air-kissing acquaintances and posing for the society photographer with practiced ease. She looks like she's hunting, Daniel murmured. She is, I said. The question is, what she's hunting for? We didn't have to wait long to find out. Victoria spotted us across the room, her gaze locking onto mine with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. She said something to her friends that made them laugh, then began making her way towards us, stopping to chat with various people along the route,
a calculated approach that would bring her maximum audience for whatever performance she had planned.
Maya, darling! Victoria's voice carried across the final few feet between us, drawing attention from nearby conversations. Don't you look sweet? Blue is such a safe choice for events like this. The word safe landed like a dart, precise and poisonous. Around us, conversations quieted as people sensed the undercurrent of tension. Victoria, I said calmly, you look lovely as well. Oh, this old thing? Victoria smoothed her hands over the red silk. I just grabbed it from the back of my closet. I didn't realize this was such a significant event. Her eyes swept the ballroom with faint dismissal. I suppose different people have different definitions of high society. Daniel's jaw tightened. Victoria. Daniel, sweetheart, relax. Maya and I are just catching up. Victoria turned back to me with that razor-sharp smile. I was just telling the girls about our conversation at brunch last week, about your little community center project. It's so admirable how you're willing to work with limited resources. Not everyone has the luxury of being choosy about their clients. Jessica and Amanda had positioned themselves strategically nearby, close enough to hear every word, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability. Other guests were starting to gather at the edges of our conversation, drawn by the unmistakable scent of drama. I find purpose in my work, regardless of the budget. Of course you do. That's what makes you so practical. Some of us are dreamers who reach for the stars, and others are more grounded in reality. The implication was clear. Victoria was the dreamer, the one who'd married Daniel when he was climbing toward success. I was the practical second choice, the one who'd settled for the leftovers. Speaking of dreams, Victoria continued, warming to her theme, I was just talking to the Hendersons about the new Presidio development. Such an exciting project. Marcus said they're looking for someone with real vision for the lead architect role. Someone who can think big. She tilted her head with mock sympathy. But I suppose that's not really your forte, is it? You seem more comfortable with the smaller scope projects. That's when I saw her. Dr. Eleanor Green, my former professor and mentor, approached from across the room with a warm smile on her face. Eleanor had been the one to encourage me to enter the Pembridge competition, the one who'd pushed me to think beyond safe choices and conservative designs. Maya Chen Reyes! There's the woman of the hour! Eleanor's voice cut through Victoria's monologue like a sword through silk. Victoria's smile flickered, confusion flashing across her features. Eleanor reached us and immediately pulled me into a warm embrace. I am so proud of you, dear. When I heard they were recognizing your work tonight, I knew I had to be here. She turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. Everyone, you're looking at one of the most innovative architects of her generation. The Pembridge restoration was nothing short of genius. Taking a crumbling 1920s building and turning it into a model of sustainable historic preservation. The Pembridge building? Someone in the crowd murmured. That beautiful renovation in the Mission District? The very one, Eleanor beamed. Maya's design saved a piece of San Francisco history while creating affordable housing units and community spaces. It's been featured in Architectural Digest, Urban Design Monthly, and the Journal of Historic Preservation. I felt the energy in the crowd shift, saw recognition dawning in faces around us. The Pembridge project had been significant, a $12 million renovation that had garnered national attention in architectural circles. Victoria's face had gone very still. And tonight, Eleanor continued, oblivious to the tension she'd just diffused. She's being honored for her work on the UCSF Trauma Center expansion. Did you all see the 60 Minutes piece about it? How her innovative triage flow design has reduced patient wait times by 30% while improving outcomes. You designed the UCSF expansion?
A woman I didn't recognize stepped forward. My daughter is a nurse there. She says the new layout has revolutionized how they handle emergencies. More murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see phones coming out, people Googling my name, architectural websites being pulled up on screens. Victoria stood frozen, her red dress suddenly looking garish under the ballroom lights. Her mouth opened, then closed, no sound emerging. Eleanor, oblivious to the tension she'd just diffused, continued chatting. Maya, dear, you must tell everyone about the community resilience project you're working on, the one with the earthquake-resistant, affordable housing designs. I glanced around at the faces, now looking at me with genuine interest, respect, curiosity.
Brilliant as always, Eleanor said. Well, I must go find my table, but congratulations again, dear. You've earned every bit of recognition you're getting tonight. As Eleanor moved away, the crowd began to disperse, but several people lingered to ask questions about my work. Business cards were exchanged. Invitations to speak at upcoming conferences were offered. Through it all, Victoria remained silent, her face a carefully composed mask that couldn't quite hide the shock in her eyes. Finally, when the last of the well-wishers had moved away, she found her voice. "Well," she said, and for the first time since I'd known her, Victoria Hale sounded uncertain. I should find my table." She turned away without another word, her friends trailing behind her like confused ducklings. I watched her go, feeling something I'd never experienced in Victoria's presence before. Pity. Daniel squeezed my hand. "That was uncomfortable," I finished. "I didn't want to win like that." "You didn't win anything, Maya. You just let people see who you really are." The soft chime of a dinner bell echoed through the ballroom, calling guests to their seats. In a few minutes, I'd be called to the stage to speak about my work, my passion, my vision for architecture that served communities rather than egos. But first, I took a moment to look around the ballroom, at the people now discussing sustainable design and community architecture, at Daniel, whose pride in me was written across his face, at Victoria's empty chair at a table across the room. Sometimes the truth didn't need to be spoken. Sometimes it just needed to be seen. Victoria sat in her car in the hotel parking garage for nearly an hour after the gala ended, staring at her phone screen. The valet had given up asking if she needed assistance. Jessica and Amanda had finally called an Uber after her third deflection of her dinner invitation. The speech Maya had given, confident, articulate, passionate, kept replaying in Victoria's mind. The standing ovation, the way people had approached Maya afterward, treating her like someone important, someone who mattered. Victoria's fingers moved across her phone screen almost without conscious thought, typing Maya Chen Reyes, architect, into the search bar. The first result made her breath catch. Rising star in sustainable architecture, Maya Chen Reyes wins National Award for Historic Preservation Innovation. The article was from Architectural Digest, accompanied by a photograph of Maya in a crisp black suit standing in front of the Pembridge building. She looked confident, professional, and accomplished. Nothing like the quiet woman who'd sat at Eleanor Hale's dining table accepting Victoria's barbs without complaint. Victoria scrolled down, her horror growing with each result. UCSF Trauma Center expansion hailed as a revolutionary in emergency medicine design. Young architect's vision transforms San Francisco housing crisis response. Maya Chen Reyes featured in the Smithsonian exhibition on 21st century urban planning. The Smithsonian. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she clicked on link after link, each one revealing another layer of Maya's professional life that she'd never bothered to discover. There were interviews in industry publications, features in design magazines, photographs of Maya receiving awards from organizations Victoria had never heard of, but were clearly prestigious. In one photo,
Maya stood next to a woman Victoria recognized as the mayor of San Francisco, both of them wearing hard hats at a groundbreaking ceremony. Local architect donates services for disaster relief housing project. She clicked on the article, her stomach sinking as she read about Maya's pro bono work after the 2018 Camp Fire, designing temporary housing units that had been so successful they'd been adopted as a model for disaster relief across California. "Shit," Victoria whispered to her empty car. She kept scrolling, diving deeper into Maya's professional history, academic publications with Maya as the lead author, speaking engagements at universities across the country, a TED Talk about sustainable urban design that had over 2 million views. 2 million views! Victoria's own Instagram account, which she had cultivated carefully for 5 years, had 30,000 followers. The deeper she dug, the more complex the picture became. Maya hadn't just stumbled into success, she'd built it, methodically and thoughtfully, over more than a decade. Her undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley, where she'd graduated summa cum laude, her master's from Columbia, where she'd written her thesis on affordable housing design and won the prestigious Kinney Fellowship.
Victoria found herself staring at a photograph from Maya's Columbia graduation. Maya stood with an older Asian woman and man, both beaming with pride. Her parents, Victoria assumed. In the photo, Maya wore the same confident smile Victoria had seen tonight at the gala, the one that suggested she knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. How had Victoria never seen this? How had she spent 3 years dismissing Maya as Daniel's safe choice without once bothering to look beneath the surface? She found an interview Maya had given to a design podcast 2 years ago, just before marrying Daniel. Victoria plugged in her earbuds and pressed play, Maya's voice filling the car. "I think the most important thing an architect can do is listen," Maya was saying. "Not to other architects or critics or industry trends, but to the communities we're designing for. What do they need? How do they live? What would make their daily experience more joyful, more functional, more human?" The interviewer asked about Maya's future plans. "I'm getting married next month to a wonderful man," Maya said, and Victoria could hear the smile in her voice. "He's taught me that love isn't about competing or proving yourself worthy. It's about finding someone who sees you clearly and chooses to build a life with that person. I'm excited to see what we create together." Victoria yanked out her earbuds, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Shame? Regret? Fear? She opened Maya's professional website, clicking through project galleries that showcased work spanning from small community centers to major urban developments. Each project included detailed explanations of Maya's design philosophy, her commitment to environmental sustainability, her focus on creating spaces that served the most vulnerable populations. At the bottom of the About page, Victoria found a paragraph that made her hands shake. Maya's approach to architecture was shaped by her early experience with loss. After losing her first husband in a car accident, she found healing in creating spaces where others could find safety, community, and hope. Her work reflects her belief that every person deserves to live in environments that support their dignity and potential. First husband. Maya had been married before Daniel, had lost someone she loved, had rebuilt her life from that grief into something meaningful and beautiful. Victoria realized she knew nothing about the woman she'd spent 3 years trying to diminish. Nothing about her background, her education, her achievements, her losses, her dreams. She'd created an entire narrative about Maya based on nothing but her own insecurity and need to feel superior. Maya wasn't the downgrade. Maya wasn't Daniel's consolation prize. Maya was accomplished, respected, successful in her own right. She didn't need Daniel's money or status or family connections. She chose to marry him, chose to take on the complicated dynamics of being a stepmother to Sophie, chose to endure Victoria's hostility with grace. Victoria sat back against her leather seats, staring up at the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. The champagne buzz from the gala had faded, leaving behind a clarity that was almost painful. For 3 years, she'd been fighting a woman who hadn't even known they were in competition.
Maya had never tried to prove she was better than Victoria because she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Crazy night! Can you believe Maya never mentioned any of that stuff about her career? So weird that she keeps it secret." But Maya hadn't kept it secret. Victoria had simply never bothered to ask. She'd made assumptions based on Maya's quiet demeanor, her casual clothes at family gatherings, her reluctance to talk about work. Victoria had mistaken humility for inadequacy, grace for weakness. The worst part was the growing realization that Maya probably knew exactly who Victoria thought she was and had chosen kindness anyway. Every barbed comment, every public slight, every social media post designed to make Maya feel small, and Maya had responded with dignity. Victoria started her car with shaking hands, her red dress suddenly feeling like a costume she'd outgrown. As she drove through the empty San Francisco streets towards her perfectly decorated house, she tried to imagine what it would feel like to face Maya again. How do you apologize for 3 years of cruelty born from your own insecurity? How do you admit that you'd been so wrong about someone that your wrongness revealed more about your character than theirs? Victoria pulled into her driveway and sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the house she'd decorated to impress people she didn't even like, thinking about the woman she'd tried so hard to diminish. Maya Chen Reyes. Architect, award winner, widow, stepmother, woman who'd built a life of meaning and service and love. Victoria had called her the Downgrade. The irony was almost unbearable.
The following Tuesday arrived gray and muted, typical San Francisco weather that matched my mood perfectly. I sat in my study, sketching preliminary designs for a new affordable housing project. But my mind kept drifting back to Saturday night's gala. The recognition had felt good, better than good. It had felt necessary, like taking a deep breath after holding it for years. But the look on Victoria's face when Eleanor had introduced me to the crowd haunted me. Not the anger or frustration I'd expected, but something closer to shock. Genuine, unvarnished surprise. She really hadn't known. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Family dinner at parents' house Sunday. Mom specifically requested you come. Dad wants to talk about your speech. He was thoroughly impressed." His words. I smiled despite my complicated feelings. Eleanor and Robert Hale were good people who'd been caught in the middle of Victoria's campaign against me for 3 years. They'd never been unkind, but they'd never intervened either, choosing the path of family peace over confrontation. Saturday night had changed something in that dynamic. Another text followed. Victoria declined, said she has other plans. That was new. Victoria never missed family dinners. They were her stage, her opportunity to remain the beloved former daughter-in-law, the mother of their only grandchild. For her to voluntarily step away felt significant. I set my phone aside and tried to focus on my sketches, but the intercom buzzed from downstairs. "Maya?" Sophie's voice came through, tinged with uncertainty. "Can you come down here? Someone's here to see you." My heart rate spiked. Sophie sounded strange, almost nervous. I saved my work and headed downstairs, finding Sophie standing in the foyer looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Who is it?" I asked. "Mom," Sophie said quietly. "She's different. Weird, not angry." Through the front window, I could see Victoria sitting in her BMW in our driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel. She'd been there for at least 10 minutes, Sophie said, just sitting. I took a breath and opened the front door. Victoria looked up when she saw me, and I was struck by how tired she looked. Her usual perfect makeup was absent, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, clothes I'd never seen her in before. She rolled down her window, but didn't get out of the car. She started, then stopped. "Could we talk? Somewhere private?" I glanced back at Sophie, who was hovering in the doorway with undisguised curiosity. "There's a coffee shop on Union Street. Cafe Luna?" Victoria nodded. 20 minutes?
After she drove away, Sophie cornered me in the kitchen. "What do you think she wants?" Sophie asked. "I don't know." I grabbed my keys and purse. "But I guess I'm about to find out." "Maya," Sophie caught my arm as I headed for the door. "Whatever she says, whatever she wants, you don't owe her anything. You know that, right?" The fierce protectiveness in her voice made my chest tight with affection. "I know, sweetheart. Thank you." Cafe Luna was nearly empty on a Tuesday afternoon. Just a few laptop-wielding freelancers and students scattered among the mismatched furniture. Victoria had claimed a corner table, 2 coffee cups already waiting. She'd ordered me a lavender latte, my favorite, though I couldn't remember ever mentioning it to her. "Sophie told me once," Victoria said quietly, noticing my surprise. "6 months ago, you were having a rough day with some work deadlines, and she was worried about you." I sat down across from her, studying her face. Up close, I could see she'd been crying recently. Her eyes were slightly red, and there were tissues crumpled in her purse. "Victoria, what's this about?" She stared into her coffee cup for a long moment. "I Googled you," she said finally. "Saturday night, after the gala, I sat in my car for 2 hours and Googled you." My stomach dropped. "Okay." "The Smithsonian exhibition, the TED Talk, the awards, the articles, the disaster relief work?" Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maya, I had no idea. I had no idea who you were." "You never asked." "No, I didn't." She looked up at me then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I spent 3 years being threatened by someone I'd never bothered to actually see. I created this entire story about you being lesser somehow, the consolation prize Daniel settled for after me." I sipped my latte, waiting. "But you're not lesser, are you? You're not a consolation prize. You're—" Victoria struggled for words. "You're accomplished in ways I never even considered. You've built something real, something that matters. And I've been acting like a complete bitch to you because I was so insecure about my own empty life that I needed you to be smaller so I could feel bigger." The raw honesty in her voice was almost harder to bear than years of subtle cruelty had been. "Victoria, no, let me finish, please." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I've spent the last 3 days thinking about every interaction we've had, every snide comment, every implication that you weren't good enough for Daniel or our family or that life. And the worst part is, you never fought back. You never tried to put me in my place or prove how wrong I was. You just took it. With grace I don't think I'll ever understand." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "I didn't take it with grace, Victoria. I took it because I didn't want to make things harder for Daniel or Sophie, because I love them both enough to tolerate being uncomfortable." "But you shouldn't have had to tolerate it. I was wrong. I was so completely horribly wrong about everything." The silence stretched between us, filled with the soft hum of the espresso machine and the murmur of other conversations. I found myself studying Victoria's face, seeing vulnerability there I'd never noticed before. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I can't live with myself if I don't. Because my daughter is watching how I treat you, and I'm teaching her that it's okay to tear down other women to make yourself feel better. Because—" She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "Because you deserve an apology. A real one. Not some surface-level sorry, but an acknowledgement that I've been cruel to someone who never deserved it." I felt something shift in my chest. Some tight knot of resentment I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying beginning to loosen. "I don't need you to make me feel validated, Victoria. I know who I am and what I'm worth. I always have." "I know you do. That's what makes this so much worse. You didn't need my approval or recognition, and I hated that about you, because I need everyone's approval to feel okay about myself." Victoria's smile was sad and self-aware. "Do you know what I do for work, Maya?" I assumed you were in marketing, PR? I manage social media accounts for a boutique fitness studio. I take pictures of yoga poses and write captions about finding your inner goddess. Victoria's laugh was bitter now. I make $30,000 a year and spend $40,000 trying to look like I belong in the circles I desperately want to be part of. Meanwhile, you're out here designing buildings and changing lives, and I'm calling you the downgrade. The picture she painted was so different from the image she'd cultivated that I felt dizzy. Victoria! I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that everything I've done to you came from my own insecurity and inadequacy. It was never about you. It was always about me feeling threatened by someone who had what I wanted. Not Daniel, but the confidence to be herself without apology. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of this conversation. Finally, Victoria spoke again. I don't expect forgiveness. I certainly don't expect friendship, but I wanted you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel like you had to prove your worth to me. I looked across the table at this woman who had been the source of so much stress in my life, now vulnerable and honest, in a way I'd never imagined possible. Thank you, I said quietly, for saying that, for seeing it. Victoria nodded, gathering her purse. I'll see you at the Sunday dinner, if that's okay with you. I'll be different, I promise. After she left, I sat alone with my lavender latte watching the late afternoon light filter through the cafe windows. My phone buzzed with the text from Sophie. How did it go? Do I need to hide the kitchen knives? I typed back, all knives remain safely in their drawer. We'll talk when I get home. But as I sat there, I realized I wasn't sure how to explain what had just happened. Victoria's apology was genuine, painful in its honesty. But apologies, even heartfelt ones, didn't erase 3 years of casual cruelty.
The question now was what came next. Whether Victoria's newfound awareness would translate into lasting change, or whether this was just temporary guilt that would fade once the shock of Saturday night wore off. I supposed I'd find out on Sunday. For now, though, I finished my latte and headed home to tell my stepdaughter that sometimes people surprise you, even when you think you know exactly who they are. The Sunday dinner invitation felt different this time. Instead of the familiar dread that usually accompanied visits to the Hale family home, I found myself curious. Victoria had kept her word about attending, but her presence at the dining table was almost ghostly. Quiet, respectful, completely unlike the woman who'd held court here for the past 3 years. Eleanor had made my favorite roast chicken, and Robert had opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. The special occasion, it turned out, was celebrating my gala recognition. I've been thinking about your speech all week, Robert said, carving the chicken with precise movements. That bit about architecture serving communities rather than egos, that really resonated with me. Dad used to be an urban planner, Daniel explained to me, though I already knew this, before he went into finance. I always regretted leaving that field, Robert continued. But seeing what you've accomplished, Maya, it reminds me why that work matters. You're making a real difference. Victoria sat across from me, her plate barely touched, nodding along with the conversation but offering little. Sophie, clearly confused by her mother's unusual silence, kept shooting glances between us. After dinner, as Eleanor and I cleared the dishes, Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway. Eleanor, would it be all right if Maya and I talked privately, maybe in the garden? Eleanor looked between us with poorly concealed curiosity. Of course, dear. Take your time. The evening air was crisp as we walked among Daniel's mother's rose bushes. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, and I noticed she was wearing a simple cardigan instead of her usual designer pieces. I've been thinking about your conversation at the cafe, Victoria said finally. About what I said about not expecting forgiveness. Okay. The thing is, I realize I was still thinking about this whole situation in terms of what I need from you, what I wanted to hear, what would make me feel better about my behavior.
She stopped walking and turned to face me. But this isn't about me, is it? This is about the damage I've done, not just to you, but to Sophie, to Daniel, to their family dynamic. I waited, sensing she needed to work through this herself. Sophie came to see me yesterday. She told me that she's been ashamed of me, that she's watched me treat you poorly and it's made her lose respect for me as a mother. My heart ached for both of them. Victoria, Sophie loves you. She's just protective of you. She's protective of you because you've been kind to her even when I was being awful. She said you never once spoke badly about me to her, never tried to turn me against me, even when I gave you every reason to. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Do you know what it's like to realize your teenage daughter has more integrity than you do? I thought about Sophie's fierce loyalty, her growing confidence, the way she defended me at that first family dinner. She's an amazing kid, I said simply. She is. And she learned that from watching you, not me. Victoria wiped her eyes. Maya, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo 3 years of being petty and cruel. But I want to try. Not for my own guilt, but because Sophie deserves better. Daniel deserves better. You deserve better. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the scent of Eleanor's roses heavy in the evening air. What would trying look like? I asked finally. Victoria stopped again, considering the question seriously. I think it means I stop talking and start listening. It means I acknowledge that this family doesn't revolve around my comfort or my feelings about the divorce. It means I support Sophie's relationship with you instead of undermining it. And between us? Between us, Victoria's smile was tentative but genuine. Maybe it means starting over. Not pretending the past didn't happen, but not letting it define every interaction going forward. I studied her face in the fading lit. The desperation I'd always sensed beneath her polished exterior had been replaced by something quieter, more genuine.
I'd like that, I said. Victoria's relief was palpable. Really? Really. But Victoria, this has to be real. Sophie's watching. Daniel's watching. If you revert to the old patterns the moment you feel threatened or insecure, I know I have to prove it, not just say it. Victoria took a deep breath. Can I ask you something? I nodded. How do you do it? How do you move through the world so confidently, without needing everyone's approval or validation? The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability. I think, I said carefully, it comes from knowing that my worth isn't dependent on being better than anyone else. My work matters because it helps people, not because it makes me look impressive. My relationships matter because they're built on genuine connection, not on what others can do for me. Victoria absorbed this quietly. I've spent so much of my life competing that I forgot how to just be. It's not too late to learn. As we walked back toward the house, I saw Daniel and Sophie through the kitchen window, loading the dishwasher together. They looked up when they saw us approaching, Daniel's expression cautious, Sophie's hopeful. Maya, Victoria said as we reached the back door. Yes. Thank you. For giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. I touched her shoulder gently. We all deserve a chance to be better than we've been. 3 weeks after the garden conversation, Sophie knocked on my study door on a Saturday morning. I looked up from my drafting table to find her holding 2 cups of coffee, her expression unusually serious for a weekend. We need to talk, she said, settling into the reading chair by the window. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just important. Sophie handed me one of the cups and curled up in the chair, pulling her knees to her chest. I want to talk about Mom. I set aside my sketches and gave her my full attention. Over the past few weeks, I'd noticed subtle changes in Sophie's demeanor. She seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the tension that had defined family gatherings for years. What about her? She's different. Really different. At first, I thought it was just guilt, like she was being nice because she felt bad about the gala thing. But it's been 3 weeks and I don't know how to describe it. Calmer? Less desperate? I sipped my coffee, waiting for Sophie to find her words. She asked me about my college applications yesterday. Not the way she usually does, not what will look impressive or what will the other parents think, but actually about what I want to study, what makes me excited about learning.
Sophie's voice carried a note of wonder. It was like talking to a different person. How did that feel? Good. Scary, but good. Sophie unwound herself from the chair and walked to the window overlooking our small garden. Maya, can I ask you something? And will you give me a real answer? Not a diplomatic stepmom answer, but a real one? Of course. Did you want to fight back? All those times she was awful to you, did you want to just destroy her? Because you could have. You could have made her look so small and petty if you'd wanted to. The question didn't surprise me. I'd been waiting for Sophie to ask for it or something like that. Yes, I said honestly. There were times I wanted to. Sometimes I fantasized about listing my accomplishments at family dinner, or casually mentioning the awards, or showing up to events in a way that would make her feel foolish for underestimating me. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Why? I considered my words carefully. This was important, not just for Sophie's understanding of what had happened, but for her understanding of how to navigate conflict in her own life.
Because revenge wouldn't have gotten me what I actually wanted, I said. I wanted peace in this family. I wanted you to feel comfortable in your own home when I was here. I wanted your dad to stop feeling torn between protecting me and keeping family harmony. Fighting back might have felt good in the moment, but it wouldn't have solved the real problem. Sophie turned from the window. What was the real problem? Your mom was hurting. She was scared and insecure and dealing with a lot of feelings about the divorce that she hadn't processed. Humiliating her would have just made her hurt more, which would have made her behavior worse, not better. So you just took it? I absorbed it without letting it define me, I corrected. There's a difference. Taking it would have meant believing what she said about me, letting her opinion change how I saw myself. But I knew who I was. Her comments said more about her than they did about me. Sophie sat back down, processing this. That's really hard to do. It is. And it's not always the right choice. If someone's behavior is truly toxic or abusive, sometimes you have to fight back or remove yourself from the situation entirely. But in this case, I could see that your mom's hostility came from pain, not malice. And I could afford to be patient because I had you and your dad and my work. I had a life that wasn't dependent on her approval. Is that what you mean when you talk about dignity? Partly. Dignity is knowing your own worth regardless of how others treat you. It's choosing your responses based on your values, not your emotions. It's understanding that someone else's bad behavior doesn't require you to behave badly in return. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. I used to think you were weak, she said finally. I'm sorry. I used to think that strong people fought back, that letting someone treat you badly meant you didn't respect yourself. And now? Now I think maybe the strongest thing you can do is choose how to respond instead of just reacting. Like, Mom was reacting to her own feelings for 3 years, but you were choosing your responses based on what you thought would be best for everyone. I felt a surge of pride in this thoughtful, insightful young woman. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone? Always. There were times I was angry at you for not fighting back. Like, I wanted you to put her in her place so I didn't have to feel embarrassed about how she was acting. I wanted you to make her stop so I didn't have to deal with the awkwardness. Her honesty took my breath away. Sophie. But now I realize that would have just made everything worse. If you had humiliated Mom, she would have been even more resentful, and I would have been caught in the middle of a war zone. Sophie met my eyes. You were protecting me, weren't you, by not escalating? I was protecting all of us, including your mom, even though she didn't know it at the time. Sophie stood up and hugged me suddenly, fiercely. I'm proud to have you as a stepmom. I'm proud of how you handled everything, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I held her tight, this brave, thoughtful girl who was learning to navigate the complexities of human relationships with more wisdom than many adults possessed. You don't have anything to apologize for, I said. You were figuring it out, just like the rest of us. As Sophie headed back to her room to work on college applications, I returned to my sketches with a lighter heart. The community center design was taking shape, spaces for children to play safely, for teenagers to study and socialize, for families to gather and support each other. Architecture that served communities rather than egos.
just like the relationships we were building, one conversation at a time. The November evening arrived with the first real chill of autumn, and Eleanor Hale had responded by cooking enough food to feed a small army. The dining room table groaned under the weight of her famous pot roast, homemade bread, and 3 different vegetable sides, while the scent of apple pie drifted from the kitchen. "Maya, dear, would you help me with the wine?" she asked, though we both knew she was perfectly capable of opening a bottle herself. In the kitchen, she turned to me with barely contained excitement. "I have news," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Victoria called me yesterday. She wanted to know if you had any dietary restrictions or food allergies." I raised an eyebrow. "She's never asked that before." "That's what I thought." She also asked if there was anything special she could bring for dessert, something you might particularly enjoy. Eleanor's smile was warm with approval. "I think our Victoria is really trying, don't you?"
Before I could answer, voices in the foyer announced the arrival of our guests. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway with Sophie, both of them carrying bags of groceries. "Mom sent us ahead with supplies," Sophie explained, unpacking what appeared to be ingredients for homemade dinner rolls. "She's parking the car." "She made dinner rolls?" I asked, surprised. "She's been practicing all week," Sophie said with a grin. The kitchen looked like a flower bomb went off, but she was determined to get them right. Victoria appeared a few minutes later, her arms full of a covered basket and a small wrapped package. She looked nervous, but genuinely happy, a combination I'd rarely seen on her face. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she said, setting the basket on the counter, "but I wanted to contribute something more meaningful than store-bought wine." Eleanor peeked under the tea towel covering the basket and gasped with delight. "Victoria, these look professional." YouTube is an amazing teacher, though I should warn everyone, my first 3 attempts were complete disasters. As we gathered around the dinner table, I noticed the subtle changes that had taken hold over the past month. Victoria sat in her usual seat, but her posture was relaxed rather than defensive. She asked Robert about his recent golf game with genuine interest, complimented Eleanor on the pot roast without the underlying competitiveness that used to edge her comments, and listened to Sophie's stories about her college interviews without trying to redirect the conversation to her own concerns. "Maya," Victoria said during a lull in conversation, "Sophie mentioned you're working on a new project, something about disaster-resistant housing?" "It's still in the early phases," I said carefully, unsure where this was leading. "Would you tell us about it? I'd love to understand more about your work." The request was so genuine, so different from her previous dismissive attitudes, that I felt the last of my defensive walls crumble. "We're developing modular housing units that can be quickly deployed after natural disasters," I explained. "The design allows them to be assembled by volunteers with basic training, but they're sturdy enough to provide real shelter while people rebuild their permanent homes." "That sounds incredible," Victoria said, and her interest was clearly real. "How do you even begin to design something like that?" As I described the project, I watched Victoria's face. She asked thoughtful questions, nodded at the right moments, and seemed genuinely fascinated by the technical challenges involved. "I saw the 60 Minutes piece about your trauma center design," Robert added. "The segment about how you shadowed emergency room doctors to understand their workflow, that level of dedication to getting it right is remarkable." Victoria looked surprised. "There was a 60 Minutes piece?" "Last spring," Eleanor said. "We recorded it. Maya was so articulate, explaining how architecture can actually save lives, not just house them." "I'd love to watch it sometime," Victoria said, looking at me. "If that would be okay with you?" "Of course." The conversation flowed naturally from there, touching on Sophie's college plans, Daniel's recent promotion, Robert's retirement hobbies. But what struck me most was how Victoria participated, contributing without dominating, listening without competing, supporting others' moments in the spotlight without needing to redirect attention to herself. As Eleanor served her apple pie, Victoria suddenly stood up,
Before dessert, she said, her voice slightly unsteady, I have something I want to say. The table went quiet. Sophie looked between her parents with concern, and Daniel reached for my hand under the table. 3 months ago, I was a person I'm not proud of. I let my own insecurities and fears turn me into someone cruel and petty. I hurt people I should have supported, and I created drama where there should have been peace. She looked directly at me. Maya, you didn't deserve any of the treatment you received from me. You came into this family with grace and kindness, and I repaid that by trying to make you feel unwelcome and inadequate. I was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. Her voice strengthened as she continued. But more than that, I want everyone here to know how much I've come to admire and respect you. Your work, yes, but more than that, your character. The way you've handled adversity, the way you've loved Daniel and Sophie, the way you've treated me with dignity even when I didn't deserve it. Victoria turned to include the whole table. Maya isn't a replacement for me in this family. She's not a second choice or a consolation prize. She's an addition. Someone who's made all of our lives richer and better. Someone I'm grateful to have as part of our extended family. She picked up the small, wrapped package she'd brought. This is for you, Maya, not as an apology gift, because no gift could make up for how I've behaved, but as a token of respect for who you are. With trembling hands, I unwrapped the package to find a small, framed photograph. The image from my Columbia graduation, the one I'd seen during Victoria's late-night research session. But this wasn't a printed screenshot, this was a professional print, beautifully matted and framed. Sophie helped me find it, Victoria explained. She said it was one of your proudest moments, and I wanted you to have it displayed properly. I thought maybe you could put it in your study, alongside your other achievements. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, the time and effort it represented, made my throat tight with emotion. Victoria, I managed. This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, she said simply, for giving me the chance to be better. As she sat back down, Eleanor reached over and squeezed her hand. Robert raised his wine glass in an impromptu toast to second chances and new beginnings. We all raised our glasses, but my eyes were on Sophie, who was looking at her mother with unmistakable pride and relief. The family she'd been caught between for years was finally, truly, a family again. After dinner, as we cleared dishes and wrapped leftovers, Victoria appeared beside me at the kitchen sink. Maya, she said quietly, I know this doesn't erase anything. I know trust is earned over time, not with one dinner or one speech. I know. But I want you to know that this is who I intend to be from now on. Not perfect, probably not always easy, but honest, present, supportive of the life you and Daniel have built together. I dried my hands and turned to face her fully. I believe you, and I'm grateful for it. Victoria smiled, the first completely genuine, unguarded smile I'd ever seen from her. Good, she said, because Sophie is already planning Thanksgiving, and she's made it very clear that we're all expected to get along beautifully. I laughed, imagining Sophie in full event planning mode, determined to orchestrate the perfect blended family holiday. I think we can manage that, I said. As we rejoined the others in the living room, I caught Daniel's eye. His expression was soft with amazement and gratitude, as if he couldn't quite believe the transformation he was witnessing. Neither could I, really. But sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they choose growth over comfort, vulnerability over defensiveness, connection over competition. Sometimes they choose to be better than they've been. And sometimes that choice changes everything. 6 months later, I sat on our balcony sketching designs for a new children's hospital, the morning sun warming my shoulders. Daniel appeared with coffee, settling beside me with that peaceful contentment that had become our new normal. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Saw the article about your hospital project in the Chronicle. Sophie and I are so proud. Thank you for everything you've taught us both about grace. I smiled and deleted the message, not from spite, but because I no longer needed external validation to know my worth. The sketch in my hands transformed into something beautiful, a blueprint for building futures defined by our own choices, not others' narratives. Some victories are quiet ones. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.